Hi, everyone, and welcome inside Rack Scottsdale for the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers. Just us two today, Gabby Chernoff and Chris Cartman. We're coming into the tail end of our live podcast here, but excited to hopefully keep doing this next semester or next football season as well. ASU football season regular season, it came to an end on Saturday with a 20-7 loss in the Territorial Cup. Not a great way for the seniors to go out, especially given, just everything that happened in the season and how well they fought back, and they just couldn't keep fighting in that Teacup game. So final record for the Sun Devils, 8-4, and then 6-3 in the Big 12. That game, of course, eliminated them from Big 12 championship game contention. So we won't have our typical Big 12 championship picture graphic at
No
the
more
end of this
scenarios.
episode. No more scenarios, but we will get to a bowl game scenario. There's about two that are highly likely, and maybe some other ones with a small chance of getting in there. But Teacup review. We're not going to get into it too much as far as specifics of the game, but obviously 5 turnovers. Kenny Dillingham said, "You're not going to win any games really if you're committing 5 turnovers." So, Chris, aside from that, what were your thoughts on the Teacup?
Yeah, rough one for Jeff Sims and for ASU's offense in particular. ASU last season was first in the Big 12 in the regular season in turnover margin. It's the most important stat in football. It was a difficult situation for ASU to be in because Arizona's secondary was so good, passing defense was so good. ASU having Jordan Tyson get hurt again, aggravating the hamstring early on in the game. You kind of need Jeff Sims to carry the ball a lot, but then he's also turnover prone. So by carrying the ball a lot, you subject your team to the potential for more turnovers. He picked the wrong night to have an off performance, and that's going to kind of go down in history in terms of how he's remembered at ASU, very unfortunately for Jeff Sims, a guy who he gave his all to this program and returned as a backup behind Sam Levitt and just wanted to get better and be an ASU player and contribute to the team as best as he could. It is true that given the equivalent opponent that you're playing, roughly Arizona, that's ultimately going to be the deciding factor. ASU's offense never really got it going this season. And that's something that we've been talking about a lot in the Devil Sanctuary on the board. I made a post today that went over the various options. There's 5 options really that Kenny Dillingham has that he could move forward with, whether that's with Marcus Arroyo in the exact same capacity or maybe a little bit of a lesser capacity, or going in a different direction. That's also, I guess, possible. So I would advise people to check that out. ASU's defense, really good season overall. The BYU game, terrible. But other than that, I would say really good. And including in the Territorial Cup, just the fourth quarter, the cumulative effect of being on the field for so much, the 2-1 disparity in time of possession, giving the ball away, having short fields. It's just too much to ask for any defense to be able to hold up, especially against an Arizona team that Noah Fafita is a really good quarterback, and they've been doing well, and they've had a lot of really good performances. And ASU just not nearly good enough in 2 of the 3 major phases of football to expect to have won that game or to be in the Big 12 championship game. And that's why that didn't happen. And injuries, of course, played a huge part in that. We've talked about that a lot.
School's coming to an end for me. ASU's football season came to an end on Saturday. So with that, what's your kind of report card for ASU's offense, defense, and special teams? Like you mentioned, the offense never really got going, and we kind of talked about this earlier. It seemed like Sam Levitt wasn't completely comfortable, or maybe Kenny Dillingham and Marcus Arroyo's assessment of what he was ready for going into second year in the system was a little bit higher maybe than what was actually the case. So kind of took him a little bit to even get going, and then he got injured. Jeff Sims comes in, who, he had his moment during Iowa State, but obviously much more turnover prone. ASU's defense dealing with some injuries, especially in the secondary as well, and then special teams. If you watch this podcast at all, you know how much we've talked about that. So what are your letter grades for each of those three categories for ASU?
Should we work from the bad news to the good news for ASU fans, or the good to the bad?
Let's end on a high note. Let's go bad to good.
Okay, bad to good. Special teams.
Shocked. I'm shocked.
Other than Jesus Gomez having a pretty good season, and it could have been better, part of that was the operational issues that they had with snapping and holding wasn't as reliable as it should have been. But when you include his relatively solid season, you can't give ASU an F, so you got to go with like a D minus, and that's because the punting was really bad, like the worst in the Big 12, about as bad as I can remember seeing it at ASU historically. And yeah, Canyon Floyd had a quad injury at the beginning of the season, and ASU added Matt McKenzie late in the cycle from Australia, and he wasn't ready to be able to be effective. And those things hurt, but there's really no excuse for high school equivalent punting at ASU. We've seen a lot of big leg punters over the years, guys who have gone on and had a chance to play professionally. And this was, and some of the teams that ASU's played this year were just so much better with their hang time and how much they could flip the field and their ability to have reliable pin punting, to angle the ball out of bounds inside the 15, to force fair catches, to have the ball bounce off and check off the inside the 5. Like, some of those things, maybe it's asking too much, but you have to be able to have 4.5 second hang time, 45-yard fair caught balls, and you have to be able to flip the field in sometimes, and that just wasn't good enough. And then ASU's punt return never really got settled in. They tried to get Raleek Brown going, and he didn't seem to have enough confidence catching the ball and reliability, and some other options were also not good enough for what they're trying to be. Showed up in the Territorial Cup, Zechariah Sample at a ball bounce and cost ASU 20-something yards. ASU didn't really give up huge catastrophic punt return or kickoff returns, but neither of those were better than average. So you put it all together, special teams was cost ASU probably a win or maybe more on average, and certainly kept games closer in wins than it should have been. The offense, not as bad as special teams, but also not nearly good enough. Probably give that like a C or a C minus. Raleek Brown, 1,000-yard performance, wasn't the starting running back at the outset of the season. Kyson Brown got hurt, unfortunately for him, going to Mississippi, his hometown. Raleek Brown had to become like the lion's share ball carrier for ASU. Kanye Uda, I think that they maybe didn't give him enough of a chance to get into a rhythm earlier on in the season. He's coming from a flexbone triple option style that's so different that the timing and the syncing of the run concepts and the blocking and understanding all that development and getting to the hole at the right pace and rhythm, I think that was a little bit of an issue. But you kind of need game reps for that, and they didn't get really enough of an opportunity. And more than anything, I would say that with Sam Leavitt getting hurt against Baylor, and with Jordan Tyson having the hamstring from Texas Tech onward, for most of the season, ASU really couldn't get into a rhythm because it was being held together by duct tape and sticks and glue or whatever. And
it's like when a tripod breaks in the back of the media room for a Kenny Dillingham presser. They started leaving just like a roll of duct tape in there for people to like tape their tripods together with.
ASU's media relations team and the content people, they did a really great job of helping us out with that. Jacob Brooks, I think, had the first tripod leg bust that ended up with some duct tape on there, and then there was another one of those more recently.
Yeah, the Cronkite tripods that they give us from their jet lab, like half of them, the legs just like don't lock, and so you like are like holding it up during the press conference for like 10 plus minutes.
Yeah, that's not really viable. But so I think the way you framed this initially, which I think was good, ASU had wanted Sam Leavitt and its passing game to be able to have more early down rhythm passing, higher completion percentage. And that was, I think, a misperception of what they were going to be able to accomplish. And then they spent some time with Jalen Moss getting hurt and then having to transition to more 12 personnel, trying to figure out like what their identity was going to be and how they were going to go about trying to be successful on that side of the ball. And with the injuries overlaying that, I think it became very difficult. So there were probably misperceptions about Levitt's readiness for certain things and the receivers' ability to be able to accomplish certain things. And then Jalen Moss getting hurt and sick had another cascading effect. And that, I think, with the injuries, just kind of prevented them from ever getting into a really good rhythm. And so Kenny Dillingham, an offensive coach by nature, really impressive coordinator at Oregon when Bo Nix was the quarterback, that enabled him to get the ASU job. In earlier stops at Florida State and Auburn and Memphis, he had done a very good job helping to run offenses and having successful quarterback play. And so now Dillingham has a decision to make. Will he stick with Arroyo in the exact same capacity, play caller, his scheme, game planning, everything? Will Dillingham move in a direction where he has more of a personal role in the offense in some way while retaining Arroyo, and they do it kind of shared in a way, or whether he wants to go in a different direction? Remember, his first year at ASU, he made a mid-season course correction to sideline his Bo Baldwin, his OC, and took over the play calling, and then Baldwin wasn't back. And this season wasn't as bad as that first season, so I'm not trying to say that whatsoever. And I think Marcus Arroyo did a really great job last season, and he was a Burroughs Award finalist and deserved a lot of credit, but this season didn't go well. And so now they have to have a conversation about what is the best thing to do moving forward, especially in light of Sam Levitt has a big decision that ASU is working through. Exit interviews are going on this week where they're having conversations with Levitt and their other players to figure out, okay, who are they going to have to replace? Who's probably going to be going into the portal? What do they need to accomplish with transfers and all that?
Do you have a strong opinion either way as to what you think would benefit ASU the most as far as that decision, and how much of a factor does Sam Levitt staying or going have in that decision, and what could kind of influence it?
I do have some opinions about that. I think I'm just going to leave them in the Devil's Sanctuary, and people.
Well, you should probably subscribe then.
People should subscribe, but I've laid.
It's Black Friday, it's Cyber Monday, Black Friday,
It's
75% off.
Yeah, there's like 5 different scenarios, and ASU's Dillingham's going to have to decide which of the 5 he wants to go with. And I think there's like 2 of them that make the most sense to me out of the 5. And I guess I would say, just as a hint, that as to my feelings, he has been so successful himself as a offensive architect and with quarterback development and play that it's hard for me to see himself not become more involved, given how this season went and how important that this is. So I think that kind of gives a hint, but it has to get a lot better, and they need to be able, no matter what they try to accomplish in terms of how they want to build their offense moving forward, which could be leaning more heavily on a dominant offensive line and tight end group and not spending as much money in rev share on wide receivers, running backs, or even quarterback. That's like a strategy. You taught that strategy. And then other schools are going to try to be top of the market at quarterback, like Sam Levitt would cost roughly top of the market. And then if you're going to have Sam Levitt, then you would be like, okay, well, we need receivers who are really good to replace Jordan Tyson because our passing game has to be better. Well, that there's an economic commitment associated with that. And so that's part of the decision that has to be made is, okay, whose offense is better suited to being able to do that? Which strategy should they pursue? And is the smartest thing from an economic standpoint and or most viable for them to be able to be successful? And I think that these are part of the inner workings of the decision that Dillingham's going to have to make.
And then defensively, your report card grading?
Yeah, A-. I think Brian Ward, ASU's defensive coordinator, was the MVP of the season for ASU. There's no way that this would have been an 8-win team without the job that he did, which was really quite impressive. Um, you know, this there wasn't a flaw with the defense. The run game was second in the Big 12. There, they had the second most sacks in the Big 12, despite being one of the teams that had the fewest um, blitzes, right? So they had four guys who were in the top 16 in sacks in the Big 12. Keyshawn Elliott, Prince Dorba, Justin Watley, I think it was seventh. I think Elliott was sixth, Watley was seven, Prince Dorba was like 13, Clayton Smith was tied for 16th. They had four of the top 19 players in the Big 12 had four more sacks. They had four, and they blitzed at the least rate, which makes it harder to get to the quarterback. So they did a really great job of improving their pass rush capability with four. That allowed them to be able to still do a really great job of being stout against the run and not getting gashed because you're bringing guys and then you allow more holes to potentially open up. And their back end, they did a really good job for the most part. There were a few plays notwithstanding, like when they went to Mississippi State and they gave up some three long ones, and then a couple other times they gave up some long ones, but they avoided the big play receptions and touchdowns. And I just think Brian Ward is a very structurally sound defensive coordinator, who has a really great game plan. He understands how to put players in position to be successful. He's good at the evaluation piece and knowing who to bring in and how they'll be able to plug into roles. They have been good at skill development. You look up front, and a lot of their guys have gotten better. The back end, they've gotten better. The linebackers have gotten better. So I would say that this was a very good, borderline great season for ASU's defense, and really unfortunate for that side of the ball that the offense and special teams didn't live up to their responsibility. Because had we been talking about an ASU offense that was even close to as good as what we thought might be the case at the outset of the season, and a decent or better special teams, if both of those things were there for ASU, we would be talking about this team being back in the Big 12 championship. And that's even perhaps with the injuries that they had this year. And anytime that you have a backup quarterback start 5 games or more in this revenue share area, that's a really difficult thing to deal with. And I wouldn't have expected them to be a 9 or 10 win game probably in that scenario. But the defense did its job. The offense wasn't even close to good enough, and special teams was an abject failure that will need a complete reboot.
Well, the defense kind of ended exactly or just about right where we thought it would be at the beginning of the season. Brian Ward set a goal at the beginning of the season. I believe it was at 30 sacks and 40 turnovers. I'm looking at this now. 32 sacks. So they got there in that regard. And then 8 forced fumbles and
they didn't get there on the turnover piece.
Yeah.
But the thing is that that's his goal every year. And I haven't looked at what their total was, and they have one more game, right? But last year, only 2 teams in the country accomplished that, and both of them were in the CFP. ASU probably wasn't there on the turnover part of it, but they did a good job. Like, objectively, it was one of the best defenses in the Big 12, top 3, probably top 4, maybe in the Big 12, and borderline top 25 defense nationally, depending on how you're evaluating it. But I think that he loves it at ASU. His family's from here. Like, he might be able to get a head coaching job, but I think it would take a lot to pry him away from ASU. And that's like as important as anything that Dillingham will do this offseason is to make sure that Brian Ward and the rest of his defensive coaching staff, because Dyron Reynolds has done a great job as a D-line coach. AJ Cooper has been excellent as a linebackers coach. Brian Carrington has had a very impressive run of player acquisition. The recruiting piece and evaluating has been great. And then he's made really impressive strides as a coach in skill development on the field, working with Dwayne Walker, who's one of the best, veteran, grizzled veteran coaches who's out there every single day working with these guys. So if they can retain all of them, and then, bring the younger guys along, and then replenish in the transfer portal, I think they still have a chance to be really good next season, especially in the secondary, depending upon, in part, what happens with Keith Abney and his decision.
Well, 8 wins this season and an 11-win season last year after a 3-9 season the year before. I think if you had told either of us that 2 years ago, we would have shaken our heads and called you crazy. But Kenny Dillingham was very proud after the Territorial Cup of the guys that did commit when ASU was a 3-9 team and were part of kind of the program shift and making what was an 8-win season that seemed impossible 2 years ago, now a disappointment to a lot of fans. So we'll hear what he had to say after the game and then kind of get into what this season could mean for the trajectory of the program and just the season as a whole.
You guys had them all raise their hand. Everybody who signed here when we were 3-9, which was anybody who didn't sign here this last year. Raise your hand. You guys all came here when we were dead. Absolutely nobody wanted to be here. And you guys took a team and did something that hasn't been done in 12 years. Went back-to-back 8-win games, 8-win seasons. Through all the adversity, you took a team that was dead and did something that hasn't been done since you guys were 6, 7, 8 years old. Now we have an opportunity still to go get 20 wins in the last 2 years. And I couldn't tell you I bet you maybe 3 times in the last 40 years that's probably happened, that a team has won 20 wins in back-to-back in a combined 2-year span. And that's our goal. We have a bowl game. And let's go in on an unbelievable note, and let's go, finish this season and send our seniors out right. But the moment sucks, but like the body of work, anybody that doesn't appreciate those guys' body of work, man, you just don't like kids, I guess, because you got to appreciate these kids' body of work. And that's what I appreciate about them, man. They wanted to be Sun Devils. They stayed Sun Devils. We faced some adversity this year. And we still found a way to win games. And I'm so proud of that group.
All right, so obviously not back to the Big 12 championship for ASU this year, but an 8-win season that seems like a disappointment after the run that the team went on last year with 11 wins and a berth in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. Chris, I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are. Kenny Dillingham is always was first time he stepped up and talked to the media after being named the head coach of the program. There's always been flashes in the pan, but he wanted to work to activate the Valley and make it kind of a consistent, a high standard for this team. What are your thoughts on kind of what these past 2 seasons, and especially this season with 8 wins being a disappointment, can speak to as far as what he's trying to accomplish in that regard?
Yeah, he's made a tremendous amount of progress. A sellout in every game this year. That's never happened, or at least not in the recorded history, according to ASU's media relations. The stadium was a lot bigger, going back more than 12, 13 years ago. But the Valley has been activated. There's much more attention, interest, media coverage of ASU now versus a decade ago, right? I used to be able to pretty much keep up with everybody's reporting on the team. You got this newspaper and you got this blog and you got these, multimedia, whatever. Now it's very difficult with all the interviews and how many people are actively trying to cover ASU, and the social media scale has dramatically increased. That's pretty cool to see. I do feel like there's a lot more people that are following what's happening and wanting to know what's going on. And the bar has been raised quite a lot in terms of the expectations this season. When 8-4 is a disappointment, that's a sign of broader progress. And absolutely, without a doubt, they had a chance to have a special season this year. And it didn't happen due to the things we've already talked about. The injuries were always going to make it really hard when you have that many of those key players, as we've ad nauseum discussed on the podcast and our post-game shows and everywhere else. But you're almost like the victim of your own creation now. And I think Dillingham knows that, because people are not going to be okay going backward from here. and they're going to have to replace 2/3 of their starters roughly into next season. And because they were able to turn it around so quickly and have so much success, people are not going to make excuses for them if they're 7-5 next year after what happened this year. They're going to say, were they a flash in the pan? Like, was that like a scattaboo and some luck in evaluations? Or do they have what it takes to put this thing together to where they can reliably be one of the better teams in the Big 12? And they still were one of the better teams in the Big 12 this year. You know, some of these games are, coming down to the wire, quite a lot of one possession, one score games, right? But there's a lot of things that they're going to have to be able to do this offseason in order to have a season that next year meets or exceeds expectations. Which again, if they're not 8-4 or better next year, doesn't matter how many starters that they lost and whatever. Doesn't matter if Sam Levitt is back or not. Like, ASU fans are going to expect that they're going to be able to be good, and that makes perfect sense.
And Kenny Dillingham, there's a lot of excitement surrounding him when he was hired. And then last year he proved himself, got everybody excited, making it all the way to the CFP. What do you think it says about him and his kind of coaching ability to, obviously they had so much talent. There were such high expectations going into this season, but to still have 8 wins despite losing and having so many of their best players injured, what can you say about just like what you think that speaks to as far as his coaching abilities and I guess ability to try and sort of bring everybody together when, that's something that can dwindle your confidence quite a bit?
Yeah, I think the Texas Tech game and what happened leading up to that was very emblematic of what you're talking about. A lot of, I think, fans, we're in the hot take world and the magnify everything and look at it to its worst degree. I think people thought after Utah, ASU was cooked. Like the season was over and they were going to be disappointing. And
I think a lot of people thought that when it was said that Jeff Sims was starting at Utah, the season was cooked.
Yeah, right. So, but when you're focused on process over results and you get your team to be able to have that level of focus, that's a real special ingredient in the ability to be successful. So I look at Dillingham as somebody who doesn't get wrapped up in the media hype, positive or negative, is not thinking about like the narratives that are so common and kind of trite really in social media and regular media and whatever. All these people that show up at practice and say, "Is this a trap game? Is this a trap game?" Like, they don't work that way. Like, if you haven't figured that out yet, it's weird almost to me. And it's I don't know, it's just so very shallow. It's very, very surface level to think about things in those ways. Dillingham he's a different type of a guy. Like, he's not chasing fame, spotlight, clicks. Like, he gets a lot of that stuff, but he gets a lot of that stuff, in my opinion, from authenticity and the difficulty of the job is such that sometimes you don't necessarily want to say certain things publicly because you have reasons for that behind it that you're trying to achieve and accomplish, and that's what we're here to try to decipher. But I just think that one of the things I've talked about quite a lot over the years, maybe not on this podcast, but in my time covering ASU, from Dirk Cutter, who replaced Bruce Snyder after some disappointing couple of seasons, before that the Rose Bowl season, from Dirk Cutter through Dennis Erickson and Todd Graham and Herm Edwards, ASU has really vacillated between two different opposing styles. You have the players coach style. Dennis Erickson really was embodied that. Herm Edwards embodied that. And they didn't have enough discipline. They had plenty of talent on those teams, but they didn't have the ability to marshal that talent and have the discipline and focus and attention to detail and execution. And then you had on the other end of the spectrum, you had the more authoritarian, the iron-fisted disciplinarian, Todd Graham, Dirk Cutter was an X and O genius, but he was kind of aloof and didn't connect well with boosters or maybe even a lot of his players. And those coaches had a hard time maintaining and then building a buy-in and a sense of culture and community that everybody felt good about. And so ASU was between these things. And Kenny Dillingham, it really, in my opinion, is the first coach that ASU's had who's able to bridge those things. And it really comes down to that mantra of we're going to have more fun playing harder than anyone in the country. And they have things that they do that are the dodgeball and the basketball thing, and they have a lot of banter, and he plays video games with the players and all this. But they also have expectations that are very high from an accountability, from a discipline. And they didn't always succeed in that area. Like, they were more penalized this year than they should have been. And I think they need to look at that with their off-season habits and what they decide to do in practices. But overall, they do embody this idea of we're just trying to be the best version of ourselves today, and then we'll see what happens. And if you take that plus the 5 tools that I've talked about that are really essential in building and maintaining a successful program, really what those are, Gabby, you have to be able to evaluate who you bring into your program and why, coaches, players. Then you have to be able to recruit those people. Like, that's different than evaluating them. You could know who's the right people, but if you can't bring them in, it's worthless. Or if you recruit the wrong ones, that's worthless. So you need to be able to evaluate and then recruit. Then you need to be able to have skill development on the field, in meetings and film, so that guys get better at what they're doing from when they get to ASU to when they're done at ASU. And then you have to be able to motivate them. If you can't motivate them, if you don't get them bought in and emotionally connected and wanting to run through a brick wall for you as a coaching staff, then even if you do the other things, it's not going to matter enough. And then the 5th thing that you really need to do is you need to be able to deploy them, scheme, right? And so I think that the scheme on offense and special teams really let ASU down this year. I don't think maybe they didn't do as good of a job with the evaluation piece at wide receiver or maybe a couple other spots in this last offseason compared to prior off seasons, but that still wasn't the flaw. The flaw really wasn't the evaluation, the recruiting, the skill development, or even the motivation. Their scheme let them down a little bit last year, coupled with the injuries that they've had. I think those are the 2 main things. And that's why I say that that's where Dillingham needs to get special teams and their offensive identity situated so that the other things that they are doing well can allow them to really shine as they're capable of.
Well, to your point of authenticity, it really does feel like when we're in those press conferences, he's just like, it just sounds like he's like talking like on the phone or like just talking to a friend. Like, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, he was like asking us for help with his doorbell because his like doorbell, whenever someone rings it like calls him. And he was like, if anybody knows how to turn this off, like, let me know.
See, sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and then when he was here, on the podcast, we were kind of talking with him, just shooting before. And then when the camera started rolling, he was like the same guy. We were just having a conversation.
Yeah.
And, when someone's kind of transparent and authentic like that, it says a lot about their character. And I think that's something that's very palpable, but also intangible that can kind of make a difference just on the people aspect of things.
I think that's a great point. He's what you see in front of the cameras is the way that he is off camera. Like, he'll talk to his players in the huddle just before he comes over and does interviews, and he says the same thing to them as he comes over and says to the huddle. Now, I've covered a lot of coaches at ASU who they have like a public and a private personality. And the way that they are when everything is off and they're not on camera or they're not in front of their team is different in a way than the way they are. And that's always been kind of weird to me. And also there's coaches who, because I talk to a lot of parents and assistants and other people that are connected. There's been a lot of times in the past where like I've been able to know that what a head coach is saying is not really the truth. That isn't the case with Dillingham. And I've known him since he was a graduate assistant a decade ago. And, we have casual conversations and everything. And I'm just saying, like, he doesn't say a bunch of stuff that he wouldn't say to his whole team, or that it, I mean, maybe maybe there's a little bit more that you might say off the record or whatever, but it's not different. And I think that is something that players and even assistant coaches and people that work for a head coach, that matters to them. The authenticity of you're real, and the things you're saying is how you genuinely feel. And it's not, I'm going to say this out of one side of my mouth and this to a different person, and then they're talking and doesn't sync up and any of that. And so I think not having any of that stuff is super important for the leadership role of a college football team.
Well, his players can tell what kind of person he is too. And Jordan Crook and the other three guys that we talked to after the game, after the Territorial Cup, were all very much echoing that sentiment of kind of the family aspect of ASU. There's only 4 seats on there, and the 4 of them came in while Kenny Dillingham was still sitting down. He got up, gave his seat to Shimon Mateer, and then Jordan Crook was asked about that. So we'll hear what he had to say now.
This team full of people that came from other places, old schools. We all came from, a past school. It's, I could just say it's truly different, to be around a collective group of people. Like, a lot of teams preach family, like they scream family, but like, it's not really, I think that's just what people say, like, but really, I feel like here, like, it's showed, like, your coach is going to call you every day, like, they're going to ask you how you doing, like, it don't even have to be none with football, like, from the top down, like, you can just see, like, it's, everything here is ran the right way, like, it's really a family culture, like, everybody really care about each other, everybody really hang out with each other outside of this, like, like I said, it's people that came from past teams, and I'm sure they can agree with me, like, it's not always the same. It's different. So I can really honestly say, like, the culture here, like, the type of love that we got for each other, and from the top down, like, it's just, you can see, everybody here, like, they're here for each other. They want to be here for each other. Our coaches really care. Like, it's not all just about ball. Like, you could tell, like, we can walk in the facility and talk to anybody, walk in anybody's office, any coach. You can sit down and laugh and talk with them. Like, it's not like that everywhere. Like, honestly, it's not. So, I think that's just what I'm, like, me in particular, what I'm most grateful for, and thankful for, over my journey. These last 2 years, like, these people, they really do care.
We hanging out after this?
Well, we heard from Jordan Crook there just about what makes this ASU group from this year so special, and all 4 of those guys who are up there were seniors. So you mentioned earlier they're going to have to replace 2/3 of their starters. What are kind of the biggest areas to target in the portal and perhaps develop some of the freshmen that are coming in? And then ASU just got a new defensive end commit yesterday from Australia. Signing days on Wednesday. They should get a couple more commits. So kind of what can be expected from this freshman class, and what are they going to need to do in the portal?
Yeah, I think they've improved their high school recruiting each year since they got to ASU, which you kind of expect that. The redshirt freshmen and the freshmen, there are a lot of impressive developmental players. I think people saw, like, Wade Helton and Makai Stewart were starting the offensive line. That's a redshirt freshman and true freshman, and they did a pretty good job, and I would expect them to be able to continue in that capacity. And Champ Westbrooks was a redshirt freshman who I think has a chance to become a starting offensive tackle. The biggest areas of need for this team in the portal would still be defensive line. They're going to lose their top 4 defensive ends. They're going to lose at least one of their best defensive tackles. They're going to lose their 2 starting linebackers. So the heart of that defense is going to need a lot of support and help, even though they have, like, good young players. Martell Hughes, as a sophomore, is a really good linebacker, and he has a chance to be a starter next year. And they'll probably be able to get Cyrus Fiaseu back with the medical red shirt, so that could help there. But you got to plan on at least one linebacker starter caliber player, and probably 2 or 3 defensive lineman starters from the transfer portal, or at least guys who are capable of starting. Offensive line, offensive tackles, really important. There is a very highly regarded junior college offensive lineman who is on the verge of flipping from an SEC school to ASU that we've been talking about for the last few days in the Devil Sanctuary. He just visited, and I think there's going to be news on this in the next day or two. Now that I'm saying this, people are going to go scour social media or whatever, but you got to probably get in on the message board. But he could be a starter right away, potentially at offensive tackle. Wide receiver, like not good enough talent wise, and they're going to need two guys who can come in and start right away, maybe even three. I would say those are the biggest positions in need. They're probably going to, you're talking about the young players, Gabby, they're probably going to lose a bunch of guys to transfer because it's just a natural cycle of if guys are around for a year, 2 years, not feeling like they're going to start, feeling like the transfer portal players might come in and jump over them. A lot of those guys are thinking about their valuation in terms of how much money they can make, what they need to do in order to be able to tap into that versus being a minimum revenue person versus going somewhere at a lower level and having a much bigger impact. So I think you're going to see some of those. ASU's had exit interviews starting today, rolling through the next day or two, where everybody on the roster comes in and gets a sense of where they stand moving into next season. And then they'll make decisions about whether or not they want to be back or transfer or leave early for professional ranks or whatever. But ASU has a lot of work to do in the portal. Like, don't be surprised if they end up with 20 transfers, and there's only a winter portal this year, not winter and spring. So that means it's going to be even more compressed. It was always mostly the winter that they got things done, like 70 to 80%, but now it's 100%. And so you need to really understand where you stand, and then there's a lot of idiosyncrasies that we're not going to get into here. As a part of that, that is why you subscribe to Sun Devil Source.
That's why you subscribe to Sun Devil Source. And just across Packer Drive, you got Sun Devil hockey and basketball. Hockey coming off a sweep against Ohio State. That's their first of the season. And then basketball will play at the Mortgage Matchup Center against Oklahoma this Saturday after finishing as the runner-up in the Maui Invitational. We're going to hear a quick word from our presenting sponsor, Jones Auto Centers, and then we will get into hockey and basketball.
For over 60 years, the Glenn Jones name has been recognized for integrity and honesty.
From the Jones Auto Centers in Wickenburg.
Jones Ford Verde Valley.
Take a nice country drive out to Buckeye.
When you're talking about Arizona's best, you're talking about the Jones Auto Group. It's quick, fast, strong.
I want to invite you to visit our new facility in Casa Grande and enjoy our country-style way of doing business. We're the Joneses.
For over 60 years, the Glenn Jones name has been recognized for integrity and honesty.
From the Jones Auto Centers in Wickenburg.
Jones Ford Verde Valley.
Take a nice country drive out to Buckeye.
When you're talking about Arizona's best, you're talking about the Jones Auto Group. It's quick, fast, strong.
I want to invite you to visit our new facility in Casa Grande and enjoy our country-style way of doing business. We're the Joneses.
Welcome back inside Rack Scottsdale for the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by who you just heard from, Jones Auto Centers, Gabby Chernoff and Chris Cartman here with you. We'll get into some ASU hockey. Like I said before the break, first sweep of the season against Ohio State. That's now 3 straight overtime victories for ASU after a pretty flat-footed start to the season.
Yeah, and buried the lead there because they had 3 goals in like several minutes, and then a 4th goal that got wiped away due to a high stick that was earlier in the play. Colin Potter finally kind of really got going. And the thing that Greg Powers has said pretty consistently about this team is, why aren't we doing this for 60 minutes? It's like they have these periods where they look like they can play with anyone, and they have had 2 top 10 wins in the last couple weeks, right? Winning on the road at North Dakota, beating Denver. Like, they are capable of beating anyone, and yet they have the puck giveaways and the lapses and the transitional issues and a penalty that shouldn't happen that then kind of undoes a lot of that. And they're at the same. They have the same record as they did through 11 games, 12 games last season, and yet they're in a worse place because their NPI is in the bottom third, roughly, of Division One. They're 43 out of 60 something teams. That's not good. No. So they have a massive amount of work ahead of them to have any chance to claw into the conversation by the last few weeks of the season. It's not impossible, but they just aren't playing with the that fervor, that intensity that I think that when you watch the third period, as I did I watched a lot of that. I was checking that out. You're like, well, why were they trailing 3-0 against this team and then play that well and have that amount of pressure that they put in the ozone in that game? So what do you think is, and Greg Powers went about this season by bringing in more freshmen, more people that were not as don't understand college hockey as well. Do you think it's chemistry? Do you think it's their youth? Do you think that it is structure or skill? What do you think are the reasons that they're not better with their record given their capacity to beat really good teams?
I think a lot of it is kind of chemistry, youth, experience. This roster was very young, 11 freshmen and 17 newcomers. And with the rule change to the CHL, ASU brought in a really good amount of those guys. And I think it's kind of a mindset switch of, maybe the level of hockey that's being played within the NCAA and the CHL there's not a huge disparity there, but in the CHL, you're playing like 60, 70 games a season. So whereas in college hockey, you're playing like 30-ish. And so the kind of, if you're playing 70 games a season, you're thinking, okay, well, if, we lose one, okay. But college
the sense
hockey,
of urgency
it's a sense of urgency
higher.
that needs to kind of be a little bit more present. And that's kind of, I asked Colin Potter, Powers has been saying all season long, we need to play for a full 60 minutes. And then he said on Saturday that the last 15 minutes of that game, when they did have that 3-goal surge and then eventually won it in overtime, is the kind of, he called it identity hockey that they need to see all season. And then Colin Potter went on to say, yeah, we need to have that kind of, sense of do or die the entire game, where every moment, every touch of the puck matters. And so I think it's kind of been a little bit of a kind of trial and error. Greg Powers has been like mixing up these lines a lot, and even over the weekend in Ohio against Ohio State, he was mixing them up mid-game and kind of seeing what worked. And he put Colin Potter on the top line with Jack Beck and Cruz Lucius, and those two were out there for the overtime winner. And I guess Powers said they're the ones who drew up that play, the overtime winning play that led to that goal. And so I think part of it too is the reason he decided to go so young with this year's roster is a lot of the guys that were on kind of the third, fourth line, the guys who were scratches last year, all went to the portal and all went to places that would be less attractive to a higher end recruit or higher end commit. And so by bringing in a lot of these young guys, I think it kind of also signifies the transition into the NCHC, where that they have all of these much better commits now that they can bring in and still have a lot of depth they wouldn't have otherwise gotten if they were still an independent team.
That makes sense, but should they have taken more transfers that have experience and were good players at maybe a tier lower than ASU? I think would be the question.
I think they brought in like Johnny Waldron. He's been in the NCHC for a couple years. He played at Miami. So I think it's kind of, perhaps he had a little bit more trust than he should have in those younger guys to kind of get the job done, because the approach he has taken the past few years has been to go out, get a bunch of veteran players and bring those guys in, and it hasn't gotten them to the tournament. So, you had a lot of those veteran players who had been in college hockey for a long time, but they were very, I would also say, top heavy the past 2 years. So, maybe he thought by balancing out the roster, bringing in some young guys who he thought could contribute, and kind of have a, 12 or 12 deep on the forward end, could benefit more than the strategies he had used in the past, which weren't getting them to the tournament.
Well, if most of these guys return next year and then they have a great season, then we will have a look back at this season and said that that's what it was. But if it doesn't happen, then it looks like it was a misplaced approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what Minnesota Duluth did last year. They had a lot of talent on their team, but it was a very, very young team.
Mm-hmm.
And ASU eliminated them in the quarterfinals. They didn't do a whole lot last season, but they didn't do much in the off season, and a lot of those guys kind of stuck around. Now they're a top 5 team in the country, and ASU plays them next week after the bye.
Okay, so let's see if ASU does that.
All right, we'll see. Turned it around last season. Similar story, but also kind of a different story this year. But only time will tell, I guess. Number 3 Duluth next week, and then Dartmouth after the holiday, who is currently undefeated.
Better get some wins.
That's how you got to move up in the NPI.
Otherwise, we're going to be talking about a pretty irrelevant situation by January.
Not irrelevant, though, ASU basketball. They've been a lot better than everyone anticipated. Mo Odom just won Big 12 Newcomer of the Week. He was going off in those last 2 games in Maui. And you
three games
in Maui, and you talked about him even before he kind of went on his hot streak about just what his ability as a point guard could do for ASU, and it seems to be playing out exactly as you said.
Yeah, I think he's just more of a natural playmaker than the guards that Bobby Hurley's had. And he's had really good ones, of course, Remy Martin, Trey Holder, etc. Mo Odom, there's a intensity about him and just a competitive spirit and an ability to elevate the players around him that I think is different. And him coupled with the 7 international players who tend to play a more open court and interactive style of basketball, I think it's made them look better on the offensive end, and they're not chucking as much, and they still need to get quite a lot better defensively, not giving up as many offensive rebounds, second chance opportunities, being more connected and communicative on the defensive side, and some of their ancillary pieces on offense need to hit shots. They got their very big lineup. They start 3 guys that are 6'10" or taller, but they need some of those stretch 4 guys to, Gerbevich or Truitt. They need those guys to hit threes. Adams coming off the bench. He's trying to get in shape. Maurice Adams, he had a foot injury and he's not really all the way to where he was last year. He's one of ASU's higher profile transfers after being an all-conference player at Cal State Northridge. If those guys can start making perimeter shots, it really opens up the floor quite a lot for Odom to get to where he wants to, or to work in the pick and roll situations with, a super dynamic big that they have that's just like a rare and special player, I would say. The downside, Gabby, is they are a 2-loss team, and they've done really well. And then you look at the rest of the Big 12, and it's like, oh, wait a second. No team in the Big 12 lost more than 2 games. And they're still 15th in the Ken Pom rankings at 85th in the country. There's 14 teams ahead of them in the Big 12. That's how good the conference is. And so, yeah, they're better than everybody pretty much thought, and they have a chance to actually be very competitive. But it's so difficult to be in the top end of that group. They've now, though, put themselves in a situation, though, where I feel like they at least have a chance. This isn't like a rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic for Bobby Hurley sort of a situation.
Well, conference play starts just after the new year, so I guess just like with hockey, time will tell if that success can continue. We're going to get into some of the ASU football bowl game scenarios after a word from drinkonthesly.com. Welcome back inside Rack Scottsdale for the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers, Gabby Chernoff and Chris Cartman. Obviously a loss in the Territorial Cup, which kind of seems like it was the, play-in game for the Holiday Bowl in San Diego on January 2nd. ASU still in Pac-12 bowl affiliation. This is the last year of that, and then they'll be in all the Big 12 bowls. But Chris, what's the kind of bowl picture looking like now after that teacup loss?
Yeah, two most likely bowls for ASU would be going back to El Paso for the Sun Bowl, where they've been several times. That game is on December 31st, or playing in the LA Bowl on December 13th, Saturday, super early. That game is against a Mountain West opponent. It's not going to really excite a lot of people, other than the fact that maybe it's in LA at SoFi Stadium, great venue. I've never been there. One that you would want to check.
LA native, Chris.
Yeah, from Southern California, so that'd be cool. December 13th, super early, like you wouldn't get your normal allotment of practices in. You probably have like 6 or 7 practices, something like that. And that's about it. That's about all you probably get because this week is off for them. But Sun Bowl, I think what it's probably going to come down to in part is whether or not 2 Big 12 teams make it into the CFP. So, like, if BYU beats Texas Tech, then they'll both probably be in. If BYU loses, then maybe not. And I think BYU probably would end up playing, my guess is USC in the Alamo Bowl, and that would then perhaps give ASU, an opportunity to still play in the Sun, or maybe it would kick them down to the LA Bowl. Not really sure, but I agree with what you said. I think that Arizona beating ASU is going to put Arizona into the Holiday Bowl, which on January 2nd, that's probably where a lot of ASU fans want it to be. Vegas, I think if Utah is in the Alamo Bowl, then maybe somebody else kicks slots in there, or maybe Utah goes to Vegas, but ASU's not, I don't think, going to be able to play up there. And then Washington is going to be somewhere in the picture, and USC probably to, we're talking about not just the Big 12, Pac-12, former Pac-12 teams, but also the Big 10 and the ACC. You have to figure out where USC and Washington and some of these other schools are going to slot in as well.
Well, we'll find out everything about the bowls after the conference championship slate, which is all of this weekend, and then the CFP show to follow. So we'll keep you updated, of course, and throughout the week. Still, regular season's over. Still lots going on in ASU athletics, and signing day on Wednesday. So make sure you're on the Sun Devil Source Sanctuary for all the insider information on that. And then we'll see you back here next week for one of our last shows here from Rack Scottsdale. Gabby Chernoff and Chris Cartman for the Sun Devil Source podcast presented by Jones Auto Centers.